Now, when I say unkilled, I mean how long it took top guilds to down certain bosses from when they were first available. Like, say, for example, how long did it take top guilds to down Mythic Archimonde after beating Mythic Manaroth? And not how long it took them to down Mythic Archimonde since the first day of the opening of Hellfire Citadel. Instead, it's from when the first time they were actually able to start doing the fight. Now that that distinction is made, let's get started on the list. Number 10 is Heroic Conclave, which took 36 days to down after the first kill of Heroic Conclave of Wind. Heroic Conclave was way overtuned when it was first attempted and not fixed until after the world first kills were done. In the kill video for the first Paragon kill in 25-man, you can actually see them just straight up leave about 8 players out of the fight during phase 1, because it was actually easier to have less players in the fight for that phase. That goes to say something about how messed up the fight was if having less players made the fight easier. Number 9 is Heroic Lich King, 25-man. He wasn't downed until 42 days after Heroic Putricide's death. The Lich King suffered from Alakir problems of being overtuned and just generally a very difficult raid encounter. But that's understandable, seeing as he's one of Warcraft's most popular villains. Giving him anything less than a crazy hard raid fight would piss off a lot of fans. The first kill wasn't achieved until the ICC stack started rolling out, giving players an extra 5% damage and healing every couple of weeks until it hit 30%. It was even thought to be an impossible fight without the ICC buff, but one of the top guilds later turned off their buff and went in for a kill to prove it could be done. Way later on in the expansion when they had a lot of gear from the Lich King himself, I might add. Number 8. Alar, the Phoenix God, killed 48 days after Magtheridon's death. Despite being the first boss of Tempest Keep, he was the second hardest boss of the raid. Alar had a very hard to deal with meteor mechanic that was supposed to split damage with everyone in it, so the idea was to have a group of people soak it so it wouldn't wipe the raid. Only, it was overtuned and did a ton of damage, and made the fight near impossible, so Guild had to think of creative ways to deal with the meteors, like having everyone in the raid level a Warlock to level 18 to learn Soulstone, and have half the raid get out of the raid Soulstones just to go out and die to the meteor and res. This was technically cheating, but Blizzard never really did anything about it, other than nerfing Soulstone every chance it got to try and prevent this tactic. Another way of splitting the damage was to use Snake Trap to split the meteor damage with all the low health snakes. Harder to do, but technically not cheating like the Soulstone method. Oh, and Alar would also randomly charge Clothies and one-shot them. That also contributed to his long time of being unkilled. Number 7, the Four Horsemen and Vanilla Nax. They lasted 56 days after Gothik's death. The original Four Horsemen are one of the hardest fights ever put in the game, mainly because it had a very unique mechanic. You see, in order to do the Four Horsemen, you needed 8 tanks. And not only did you need 8 tanks, you needed 8 warrior tanks with a specific 4-set bonus that made it so your taunt couldn't miss. Because in those days, taunt could miss, and one missed taunt meant a wipe on 4 horsemen. So the reason this fight took so long to down was basically just having to gear up 8 warrior tanks with 8 4-set bonuses to do literally one boss. Want to know how many other bosses besides 4 horsemen used 8 tanks? 0. Number 6, High Astromancer Solarian, killed 59 days after Magtheridon. Another Tempest Keep boss. This boss went through 3 nerfs because it was considered too hard to kill. That, combined with most guilds working on Alar in the same instance instead of High Astromancer, leads to her long unkilled time. Her first iteration had her being a high health boss with a front arc arcane missile attack that ignored arcane resistance. Its second form, after Blizzard decided that was crazy hard to beat, was a nerf to her health and arcane missiles that hit the entire raid instead of an arc cone, which still ignored arcane resistance. Top guilds were finally able to get a kill at this version, but it was considered still too hard. It was later nerfed 2 more times to be what it is today. Number 5, Yogg-Saron, Alone in the Darkness. Killed 70 days after Yogg won Light in the Darkness. This version of the Yogg fight with no keepers was long thought to be mathematically impossible to do, until the Chinese guild Stars was able to do the fight with some really smart kiting patterns to the ads that spawn in the last phase. Plus, Warlocks being able to channel the boss without having to actually face it. There was one other kill before Stars got their legit kill, where the raid just exploited the encounter by evading the ads in the last phase by getting healing aggro on them from inside Yogg's brain room, but That one didn't count for obvious reasons. Number 4, Ragnaros. Killed 74 days after Majordomo's death. Ragnaros was one of the first final bosses ever, and everyone was still pretty new to raiding, so his long kill time shouldn't be all that surprising really. It was simply a much tougher and long as hell fight compared to everything else in Molten Core. Number 3, Chromaggus, tied with Ragnaros at 74 days after Ebonroc's death. Chromaggus was one of the more technically challenging fights in vanilla, when not many fights besides maybe final bosses of the raid were. It was also in the same raid where 2 of the hardest boss fights ever were the first and second boss of the instance, causing many guilds to break up before even getting to Chromaggus. As for the fight itself, well, it was just a very complicated fight. We have many like it today, but it was a new thing for vanilla raiders, so it took them some time to get used to the mechanics. Once they did though, it became a lot easier to do on attempts afterwards. There wasn't really any bugs or over-tuning mistakes that half the other bosses on this list have. Chromaggus was just a technically challenging fight. Number 2, Cthulhu, killed 86 days after the Twin Emperor's first death. Cthulhu is considered by most WoW players as the hardest boss fight ever made. I don't personally agree with that. Cthulhu was just horribly overtuned and bugged. The first kill didn't happen until after Blizzard nerfed the fight, because it was technically impossible to do, even with all the best gear in the game and if every player did their job perfectly. So why is Cthulhu only the second longest unkilled boss? If he was unkillable? Well, because there was another boss in the same instance that was also pretty much unkillable and way less sought after. The number 1 unkilled boss is Ouro, who was killed 87 days after the Twin Emperor's defeat, and 1 day after Cthulhu. You see, the thing with Ouro was that he was overtuned and bugged, plus an optional boss, so no one really bothered with it and worked on Cthulhu instead. His biggest bug was his Sandblast ability, which hit everyone in front of him for enough damage to take about 90% of a geared caster's health, and also stunned everyone for a couple of seconds. He would then turn to his next highest aggro target and do it again. The idea behind this mechanic was to create a small safe zone for the raid while only 2 tanks got hit. What instead happened was he would cast Sandblast 4 times before the first stun wore off, not 2. Meaning there were no safe zones. Everyone got hit and stunned if they didn't die from the ability damage itself. To top it off, his Quake ability was overtuned and did more damage than it should have. He stayed underground longer than he was above ground. His adds that spawned during this phase were also overtuned, and sometimes he just wouldn't come back up after going underground, spawning adds endlessly. All in all, pretty nasty fight. There's a reason people avoided it before Blizzard finally fixed it.